My ex looked me in the eye at a black tie gala and said, "You're not on the list." He was standing there with the woman who used to be my best friend, both of them certain I had come to watch their perfect new life from the outside. But seconds later, the chairman behind the merger walked out, shook my hand, and said they had been waiting for me. And that was only the beginning, because by the next morning, the same man who smirked at me in the lobby would be sitting in a boardroom, forced to explain why the strategy that built his reputation had my fingerprints all over it. I'm Marina Hale, and this is the night the people who tried to shut me out watched me walk into the room that could end his career. Chapter 1. You're not on the list. By the time I stepped out of the car in River North, the Chicago River was holding the city lights like a second skyline. September had turned the air sharp enough to wake you up, cool against my neck, clean in a way that made everything feel more precise. The hotel rose over the block in glass and stone, all polished confidence, the kind of place designed to make people stand taller the moment they crossed the threshold. I stood there for one breath longer than necessary, and looked at my reflection in the revolving door. Navy silk blouse, black tailored trousers, a camel coat draped over one arm, gold earrings small enough not to announce themselves, low heels I could actually walk in. Nothing loud, nothing pleading. I had learned a long time ago that there was a kind of power in not decorating your competence for other people's comfort. Then I went inside. The lobby smelled faintly of white tea and polished wood. Staff moved with that careful, expensive efficiency hotels train into people, discreet and swift, as if no one ever had to wait for anything here. Across the marble floor, beyond a bank of arrangements in cream roses and eucalyptus, I could already see the check-in tables outside the ballroom. I was early. I was almost always early. Arthur used to say that serious people arrived before the room had a chance to decide what they were worth. He said it with a dry little smile, as if he knew exactly how often rooms got that wrong. I walked toward the ballroom and handed my name to the woman at check-in. Her tag read Denise Calder. Mid-40s, immaculate blazer, the kind of composed face that had probably managed 1,000 small social fires without letting smoke show. Marina Hale, I said. Her fingers moved over the tablet. Her professional smile stayed in place for a beat too long. I saw it then, the smallest pause, almost nothing at all, but enough. Her eyes flicked across the screen and narrowed by a fraction. Not confusion. Recognition of something unexpected. I didn't lean in, but I caught enough to read the note reflected faintly on the glass. Escort requested. Notify Bennett office. Denise looked up at me, and whatever she had first assumed was already being replaced by procedure. Mess. Hale. Welcome. If you'll give me just one moment, of course, I said. She reached for her discreet headset, and before she could finish, I felt him before I heard him. Some people have a way of entering your nervous system, long after they've left your life. The body remembers it before the mind agrees to. Well, that is surprising, Evan said. I turned. Evan Whitaker looked exactly the way men like him are rewarded for looking in rooms like this. Perfect tuxedo. Silver at the temples that had arrived at just the right pace to suggest authority instead of age. A controlled smile, practiced enough to seem effortless. For a second, if you didn't know him, you might have mistaken him for gracious. I knew better. A few feet behind him stood Celeste Dunn, one hand resting lightly against a silver-beaded clutch, her expression arranged into warm concern. She wore pale blue, soft and expensive, the kind of dress that said donor wife without trying too hard. Graceful philanthropy. That was always Celeste's strongest costume. She could stand in the wreckage of your life and make herself look like the kindest person in the room. There are faces you don't forget. Not because you miss them, but because they once stood too close to the blast radius, even stopped near the table and glanced at Denise's screen before shifting his attention back to me. I think there's been a mistake, he said, lowering his voice into something intimate and sharp. You're not on the invite list. There it was. The tone. Smooth enough to avoid a scene, cruel enough to land exactly where intended. I had heard that voice at podiums and board dinners and private celebrations. I had heard versions of it wrapped around ideas he delivered, as if they had arrived to him fully formed, untouched by anyone else's labor. There had been years when he built entire rooms around words that were not entirely his, and confidence was the trick that kept people from asking where the scaffolding came from. He looked at me now with the smugness of a man who believed my presence could only mean one of two things: that I was still attached to an old pain, or worse, that I had come to witness how successful he had become without me. Celeste stepped closer, her face full of gentle regret. "Marina, maybe this isn't the best place," she said, soft voice, careful eyes. Concern sharpened into dismissal. It was almost elegant. For a brief second, old instincts stirred, the old humiliation, the old temptation to explain myself to people who had never deserved the truth in the first place. But age gives you gifts if you let it. One of them is this: you stop confusing access with approval. I looked at Denise, not at either of them. "Then let's let the list decide," I said. Silence spread outward, subtle but immediate. Not enough to draw the entire lobby, just enough to make the nearby cluster of guests begin pretending not to listen. Denise nodded once, grateful for the permission to follow process instead of personality. She touched her headset and spoke in a low voice. "This is check-in. I need Bennett office at the River Ballroom entrance. Protocol note on guest file." "Yes," Marina Hale, even smile thinned. "That won't be necessary," he said to Denise, with the easy certainty of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I can clear this up." Denise did not look at him. To her credit, she looked only at her screen. "I'm sure it will be resolved shortly, sir." That was when I knew the evening had already shifted. Celeste's posture changed almost imperceptibly. If you didn't know her, you'd miss it. Her shoulders went still. Her mouth held one beat too carefully. She was listening now, not performing. A man in a dark suit appeared from the hallway leading toward the private offices. He moved quickly, but not hurriedly. Late 50s, lean, silver-framed glasses, a face composed by years of handling important people and inconvenient truths. He looked first at Denise, then at me. "He's Hales. I'm Miles Bennett. Thank you for your patience." The air around us tightened. He extended his hand. I took it, "Mr. Bennett." He gave a small nod, respectful and direct. "Harlan's office was notified of your arrival. You're expected. If you're ready, I'll escort you in." Expected, not admitted. Not accommodated. Expected. I didn't turn immediately, but I could feel Evan recalculating behind his eyes. Men like him were excellent at reading status when the market changed without warning. "There must be some confusion," Evan said, and there was still polish in his voice, but the rhythm had broken. "Marina and I know each other. If this is about a guest credential, I'm sure." "There is no confusion," Miles said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Certain men never have to be loud because institutions speak for them. Mess. Hale is here by instruction of the chairman's office." That landed. Near the ballroom doors, I noticed a few heads turn. An executive I recognized from industry journals. A pair of board-adjacent donors. Then Michael Rhodes, standing half in conversation with two men near the bar setup, his expression shifting from polite distraction to focused interest. Social proof rarely arrives with applause. It usually starts in silence, with people realizing they may have evaluated the wrong person. Celeste looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw it. Not fear exactly. Something colder. The first flicker of uncertainty in a woman who had spent years believing the story was already written. Miles stepped aside to gesture toward the ballroom entrance. Before I could move, another presence gathered at the doorway, and the atmosphere changed again, deeper this time. The way rooms change when real authority arrives without announcement. Harlan Bennett came out from the ballroom himself. He was older than when I had last seen him in person, broader through the shoulders. His white hair cut close, his expression alert beneath the ease. He did not look like a figurehead. He looked like a man who still made decisions other people spent months preparing for. When he saw me, his face warmed with unmistakable recognition. "Marina," he said, and crossed the last few feet with his hand already extended. "I'm so glad you made it." I shook his hand. His grip was firm, his welcome unambiguous. "Thank you for having me. Harlan, Arthur, and a few of the board members are waiting for you inside," he said. "We didn't want to begin this part without you. This part, not the gala. Not the dinner, this part." It was a small sentence. It rearranged everything. Around us, no one spoke, but attention sharpened like light through glass. Michael Rhodes had fully turned now. A woman beside him murmured something I couldn't hear. Denise lowered her eyes in professional discretion, though I could tell she understood exactly what had just happened. I did not look at Evan right away. I didn't have to. I could feel the heat of his disbelief, the strain of someone trying to maintain a public face while the private math fell apart behind it. There are rooms that do not open because you pound on the door hard enough. They open because records exist, because memories last longer than lies, and because eventually a truth reaches the point where it no longer waits outside, asking permission to enter. Harlan stepped back and motioned toward the ballroom. "Come in," he said. As I moved past Evan, my gaze dropped for a moment to my own left hand. Bare now. Steady. The skin where a ring had once rested was long unchanged, but memory is strange. It doesn't need evidence. It only needs proximity. There had been a night, years ago, when I slid that ring off and placed it in a velvet box on a table neither of us owned. A hotel suite in Boston, neutral ground chosen because by then even our grief had become strategic. I had thought handing it back would be the hardest thing I ever did. I was wrong. Celeste shifted to give me room. Her perfume reached me first, expensive and powder-soft. She did not speak again. Neither did Evan. I passed between them and walked toward the ballroom doors under the chandelier light, hearing the hum of conversation inside, the clink of glasses, the low orchestral cover of a song I almost recognized. 4 years earlier, I had believed losing them meant losing the future I had spent half my life helping build. What Evan did not know was that I hadn't come there as a guest. I had come as part of the merger he was trying to climb to the top of. Chapter 2. The night everything spilled. There are nights that split your life so cleanly you can still feel the seam years later. By 2024, I was 53 years old. Old enough to know that reinvention is usually just grief with a better haircut and a forwarding address. Before Love's Park, before the consulting work, before I learned how to make a smaller life feel honest instead of diminished, I had a title people respected, and a future I thought had finally steadied into place. From 2012 to 2019, I was a VP-level marketing and growth leader at Midwest Process Solutions. It was not glamorous work, but it was real work. The kind that keeps manufacturing companies alive and profitable and impressive enough for men in tailored suits to take credit for the air in the room. I understood markets, messaging, adoption curves, buyer hesitation, internal politics, and the difference between strategy and expensive vocabulary. I had spent years becoming the person other people called when the numbers were flat and the story made no sense. In 2014, I bought a 2-bedroom townhouse in Wheaton. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. White kitchen cabinets, a narrow patio out back, decent light in the mornings. I painted the guest room myself and told myself it was practical. Though part of me always imagined families staying over for holidays, future grandchildren dragging toys across the floor. A life with enough continuity to leave a dent in the furniture. My daughter from my first marriage, Rachel Hale Whitmore, was already on her way to becoming the kind of physical therapist patients remember for the rest of their lives. My son, Owen Whitmore, had that quiet steadiness that made firefighting and EMT work seem less like bravery than instinct. My mother, June Hale, was still fiercely herself then, carrying dignity the way some women carry perfume. So naturally, you only notice it when someone else walks in without any. By the time Evan came into my life in 2013, I thought I had earned a softer chapter. He was polished in that specific corporate way that reassures people before they've examined the content. Good posture, measured laugh, crisp shirts. He worked in logistics and operations, and he knew how to sound as if he were always standing, one rung below the next promotion. At the time, I mistook that for ambition with substance. What I had not yet learned was that some people can look remarkably competent when they spend enough time standing beside the person, actually doing the thinking. He courted well. I will give him that. Reservations made under my name, because he knew I liked arriving to things already handled. Flowers that were never too much. Texts at 6:30 in the morning before major meetings. Go be brilliant. He listened when I talked about work, or seemed to. He asked smart questions. He made me believe he admired not only how capable I was, but the fact of my capability itself. That is a dangerous thing for a woman to be offered if she has spent years being told men want strength until they are made to live beside it. We got engaged. That part matters, because people like to sand a story down after the fact and act as if a betrayal was casual when it was not. He asked me on a weekend in Lake Geneva with a ring he had clearly spent time choosing, an oval diamond set simply, elegant enough to feel adult. Rachel cried when I called her. Owen said, took him long enough. My mother held my hand across her kitchen table and said, well, maybe this one understands your value. For a while, I thought he did. There was a wedding planning folder on my laptop, vendor tabs, a venue shortlist, a tentative date we had floated to family for early summer. In one of my kitchen drawers, there was a stack of paint samples because we had talked, in that vague, dangerous way engaged people do, about maybe selling one place and buying something together with more room and fewer compromises. There are humiliations that arrive all at once, and there are humiliations that only reveal themselves later, one receipt at a time. Between 2015 and 2019, I helped Evan constantly. Not because he demanded it outright, at least not at first, but because that is what partnership had always meant to me. He would send me a deck and ask whether the flow felt muddy. I would reframe half of it. He would show me opening remarks for an internal keynote and say he wanted them to sound sharper. I would rewrite the top third, tighten the language, build an arc, hand him back something persuasive. I turned dry operational updates into growth maps. I cut dead language out of his slides and replaced it with momentum. I wrote taglines he repeated later as if they had risen naturally from his own thinking. After a while, I could hear my own cadence in his presentations. That was the part that would come back to me later. Not just that I had helped him, but that he had learned how to wear my language like a tailored coat. The theft was never only in the words. It was in the pattern, the reliance. The way he built a professional identity using instincts he had watched up close and learned to imitate. And then there was Celeste. I had known Celeste Dunn for nearly 30 years. We met in community college and later worked overlapping retail jobs when we were both too young to understand how much adulthood would cost. We had the kind of friendship built in fluorescent break rooms and cheap diner coffee and long Midwestern winters. When women tell each other the truth because no one else is asking. She had seen me through the first marriage and its collapse. She knew what it had taken for me to trust again. I had believed sincerely that she was one of those women who would still be in your kitchen at 11 p.m. If your life caught fire, that is the trouble with history. It can make proximity feel like character. The night everything ended was in October of 2020. I had made lasagna because the weather had turned and because domestic gestures still felt, to me then, like a kind of future tense. Evan and I were supposed to have dinner at his place. I arrived earlier than planned because a call had wrapped ahead of schedule, and I thought it might be nice to surprise him. I remember balancing the hot dish in both hands, nudging the door closed with my hip after letting myself in. The house was too quiet. Not empty. Quiet. A held breath kind of quiet. I took 2 steps toward the kitchen and then I saw enough. I did not need the whole tableau. People think betrayal requires a full cinematic reveal. It does not. The body understands long before the mind has assembled its case. A shirt on the chair that should not have been there. Celeste's voice from down the hall, low and startled. Evan appearing with that look men get when they are already deciding what version of events is most manageable. The lasagna slipped. I still remember the sound. Ceramic hitting hardwood. The wet burst of red sauce. mozzarella and ricotta and meat scattering across the floor in a steaming wreck. The smell of tomato and baked cheese filled the room so fast it made me feel sick. For months afterward, I could not pass an Italian restaurant without my chest tightening. Celeste came into view first, fastening one earring with shaking fingers, as if finishing the gesture might restore order. "Marina," she said. "Just my name. Nothing useful after it." Even stepped forward with his palms slightly out, not in guilt but in containment. The same posture I had seen him use when a meeting was going sideways and he wanted everyone to stay calm while he regained control. "This is not what it looks like," he said. It is a mark of my shock that I almost laughed. Because of course it was exactly what it looked like. A woman I had loved like family and a man I was going to marry, standing in the collapse of my future, both of them hoping language might still be enough to blur the edges. Celeste started crying. Not hard, not honestly. The kind of crying that asks to be managed. "I never meant for this to happen," she said. I looked at her and thought, "Then what exactly did you mean for all the other moments to be?" But I did not say that. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I stood there with sauce near my shoes and heat rising off the broken dish and felt something in me go cold enough to survive. Rachel wanted war when I told her. Public war. Legal war. The kind of clean consequence children imagine should exist when they are still young enough to believe damage naturally produces justice. Owen said much less. He showed up with boxes. Changed a lock I had been meaning to change anyway, carried things I could not look at, and stayed until the kitchen was clean. My mother sat at my table, folded her hands, and said that family shame has a way of making fools rush to perform their wounds. Then she looked at me steadily and said that dignity sometimes lies in how you leave, not in how quickly you strike back. I hated that she was right because it felt too much like losing quietly. I pulled back. I stopped showing up. I did not campaign for sympathy. I did not call every mutual friend and deliver my evidence like exhibits in a trial. And because I left the silence open, other people filled it. Pamela Sutton and women like her took up the story first, in that polished suburban way that masquerades as maturity. These things happen. Marina should be graceful. She can be intense. Maybe she was hard to live with. Maybe it had been over for a long time. People said these things over Chardonnay and fundraiser lunches and called it compassion because no one raised their voice. Celeste did not stay silent. That was its own second betrayal. She let herself become the softer version of events, the woman who had not meant to hurt anyone. The woman caught in an impossible situation. The woman trying to move forward while I apparently could not. Bitter. Dramatic. Unable to let go. It is astonishing how quickly a woman can be recast as unstable once she stops making other people comfortable. One charity board did not ask me back the following year. A couple we had vacationed with suddenly became hard to schedule. Invitations narrowed, then stopped. No headline, no public scandal. Just the deeply American humiliation of realizing your phone is quiet because a consensus formed without you. The practical losses came next. I stayed afloat through the end of 2020 and into early 2021 by reducing my life to tasks. Pack, sort, forward mail, breathe. For a short while, I rented a place in Geneva just to get out of Wheaton and all its familiar parking lots, all its restaurants with corners full of memory. In spring of 2021, I sold the townhouse for less than I should have. Brooke Ellison, my cousin and my realtor, was brutally kind about it. She told me the discount was not a failure. It was the price of reclaiming peace, before nostalgia talked me into another year of misery. By mid to late 2021, I moved to Loves Park, near Rockford, into a smaller ranch house with outdated cabinets and a yard that needed work. I paid for repairs with consulting income and did what women like me have always done when no one is coming to save them. I made a life with what remained. For a while, I thought that was the full accounting. I thought I had lost a fiancé, a best friend, a house, a social orbit, and the fantasy of some late-life blended family that would finally make the hard years add up to something tender. Then, while I was still rebuilding, I started hearing Evan's name attached to presentations in the industry. New frameworks. Fresh messaging. Strategic language that sounded familiar enough to make my skin prickle. I thought I had only lost a man and a friend. I did not yet understand that someone had also started walking around with the fingerprints of my mind on his work. Chapter 3. The Work Still. Had my fingerprints by March of 2021, I had become a woman who could make a credible life out of very little sleep and a color-coded legal pad. Freelance work kept the lights on. Pride kept the invoices polite. I was still in that ugly middle stretch where everyone tells you rebuilding is noble, as if nobility pays for roofing estimates and health insurance. I took strategy calls from my rental in Geneva with unpacked boxes against the wall and a folding table pretending to be a desk. I was competent, employable, and one humiliating surprise away from tears at any given moment. Arthur Gaines met me for coffee on a wet Thursday morning in Rockford. He was already there when I arrived, of course. 45 minutes early, I later learned, because he believed punctuality was what separated seriousness from theater. He had read everything I sent him, including the appendix. He was in his 70s, trim, unsentimental, and so sparing with praise that when it came, it landed like currency. He slid a marked-up packet across the table. "You think clearly," he said. It had been a long time since anyone had led with that. Gaines Precision Components was not in crisis exactly, but it had that tired post-COVID strain so many companies carried then. Supply chains were still uneven. Lead times had gone feral. Sales had flattened into that dangerous kind of stability executives mistake for resilience. Arthur was chairman emeritus by then, still influential, still the kind of man whose silence made other people revise their sentences. He did not offer sympathy. He offered terms. Cash plus equity, he said. If you help build it, you should share in the value. I looked at him for a second longer than was probably elegant. That's not decorative consultant language, I said. No, he said. I don't hire decorative people. That was the first time after Evan, after Celeste, after the townhouse and all the rest of it, that I felt someone looking directly at my mind instead of the wreckage around it. So I said yes. The work was real from the first week. Plant tours, sales reviews, margin discussions that ran long because nobody agreed on whether the problem was message, market, pricing, or execution. I spent mornings in conference rooms and afternoons on concrete floors in steel-toed boots, asking line managers where deals were stalling and why customers hesitated after the second meeting. Men who had spent 20 years in manufacturing looked at me and saw marketing first, woman second, outsider always. I learned not to flinch at it. Victor Lang, the CFO, was the cleanest version of skepticism. He was not cruel, which almost made him harder to win over. He didn't patronize me. He simply required proof in the way accountants require oxygen. In one meeting that summer, I walked the leadership team through a market expansion roadmap I had built out in layers. Customer segmentation, adjacent industry entry, sequencing by operational readiness, messaging architecture aligned to capacity realities. I had barely made it through the second section when Victor leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "It's coherent," he said, "but coherent and executable aren't the same thing." The room went still. He continued. "Where does this fail under labor constraints? Where does it break if freight volatility holds through Q4? What happens when sales promises a mix the plant can't support?" It was not an ambush. I looked at him and said, "It fails if we treat strategy like a brochure instead of a set of operational decisions. Which is why the sequencing is tied to fulfillment tolerance, not just market appetite." He held my gaze. "So show me, I intend to." Afterward, Arthur caught up with me in the hallway. "He does that when he's interested," he said. "That's a charming trait." Arthur almost smiled. "If he didn't think you mattered, he'd save his energy." I kept building. By 2022 and into 2023, the work started to knit together. We tightened the story the company told the market. We clarified where growth could actually come from rather than where people wished it might. I prepared board materials, shaped strategy offsites, translated operations into language that investors and directors could trust without feeling managed. Alyssa Romero, sharp as wire and impossible to bluff, watched me sketch growth axes across a whiteboard during one offsite and later said, half amused, half admiring, "You do realize you build these things in layers before most people have found the marker." "I've had practice," I said. She did not know then how much. Kara Wexler came back into my orbit sometime that year. We had known each other professionally for years, and she had the kind of communications brain that hears the shape of a sentence before most people know whether one exists. By then, she was director of corporate communications at another industrial firm, well-connected, discreet, and allergic to nonsense. She called me after an industry event in Chicago. "This is going to sound strange," she said, "but I sat through a logistics panel this morning and kept having the uncanny feeling that I was listening to you." I was standing in my kitchen in Love's Park, barefoot, with a mug gone cold in my hand. "What does that mean?" "It means the phrasing was yours, not topic area, cadence, structure, the way the argument turned." My stomach tightened. "Who?" A pause. "Evan. There are names that still know where to press." I said nothing. Kara continued more carefully. "I don't mean broad overlap. I mean specific enough that I noticed. He used a 3-part adoption sequence that sounded like one of your old frameworks, even the transition language. I wrote it down because it bothered me. At first I told myself there were only so many ways to describe market adoption. Buyer trust, internal friction, all the subjects I had spent half my career making legible. Language circulates. Good ideas echo. Adults do not accuse people of theft because a phrase feels familiar. Then Nina Carver emailed me. Nina had been an operations planning lead back in my Midwest Process Solutions years. One of those women companies depend on and then somehow fail to elevate properly. Precise, organized, impossible to rattle. We had not spoken in a while, but when we did, no time was wasted on ceremony. Her subject line read, "Strange question. We got on a call that evening. I was cleaning out old folders," she said, "and I found draft decks from 2016 to 2018. Your tracked changes are all over them." I sat down. "What kind of decks?" She named 2 internal strategy reviews and 1 keynote support file Evan had presented years ago. "There's more," she said. "Outlook chains, SharePoint timestamps, comments in the notes fields." "Marina, this isn't inspiration. This is lineage." That word hit me harder than I expected. Lineage. Not hurt feelings, not vibes, not feminine intuition dismissed by men with polished resumes. A trail. Over the next few weeks, Nina and I compared materials. Old email chains, revision histories, calendar invites for prep meetings, photos of whiteboards from conference rooms no one had thought to document for any grand reason beyond habit. In one folder, she found a scan of a yellow legal pad page from 2016 with my slanted handwriting all over it, the rough skeleton of a market sequencing framework I had built before a leadership offsite. 3 columns, 2 loops, arrows connecting customer readiness to internal capability. Primitive and unmistakably mine. I stared at the image on my laptop and felt an odd combination of nausea and relief. I had not imagined it. The uglier realization arrived through Jocelyn Reed. We met for drinks near O'Hare after she reached out through a mutual contact, saying she had heard I was quietly gathering some history on Evan's work. Jocelyn was a VP of Client Solutions, all composure and exact diction, the kind of woman who had learned to keep her outrage professionally hydrated, but never overflowing. "He did it to me too," she said, not wholesale. Not in ways dramatic enough to set off alarms. Internal strategy reviews, where she floated the solution, and he restated it 10 minutes later with executive posture and received the nods. Client framing she had built that came back in his deck under his banner. Her work, blurred just enough to become deniable. "There are people who steal like burglars," she said. "And then there are people who stand next to the person building the house and wait until guests arrive to accept compliments on the crown molding." I laughed once, sharply, because it was too accurate not to. That was when the pattern settled into focus. Not a single betrayal. A method. Evan did not invent much. He observed, absorbed, mirrored, and stepped forward at the moment of attribution. And because he looked credible while doing it, because he had the posture and the shirts, and the tempered voice of a man other men assumed was solid, the theft rarely had to be aggressive. It only had to be timely. Still, I said nothing publicly. At Gaines, my reputation was finally becoming about work again. Not scandal, not survival. Work. If I raised the issue too soon, I could see exactly how it would be received by the wrong kind of people. Bitter ex-fiancé. Personal grievance dressed up as professional ethics. A woman in her 50s unable to separate heartbreak from business. So I kept my head down and built my case in private, while continuing to earn my standing in rooms where standing is never gifted twice. By early 2024, Bennett Industrial Group entered serious merger and due diligence discussions with Gaines Precision Components. The process was exhaustive in the way these things always are. Contribution maps, leadership assessments, integration scenarios, workstream ownership. My name appeared in board books and evaluation materials because it belonged there. Not as decoration, not as courtesy, because the turnaround architecture had my hands on it. That was how Harlan Bennett first knew me. Not from a gala line, not from social chatter, but from documents that measured value in outcomes. We met in a conference room with too much glass and not enough oxygen. I've heard your name in 3 different contexts, he said. That usually means one of 2 things. Either you create order or you create dependency. Which are you hoping for? I asked. The first, he said. Then we'll get along. There was talk of a meaningful post-merger strategic integration role, though nobody dressed it up with vanity titles yet. I didn't need glamorous, I needed real. A voice in the work, a seat where substance mattered. Then Kara sent me the slides. Off the record, she wrote. Attached was a summary from another industry event, and a partial deck circulating afterward among logistics and manufacturing executives. I opened it at my dining table after dinner, the house quiet around me, and felt the blood leave my face by the 3rd slide. There it was, not merely similar thinking. My thinking. The same underlying architecture, the same sequence of argument. Even the rhythm of the language, the turn from problem to adoption friction to trust building sequence, carried that clipped, deliberate cadence I had once fed into his drafts line by line. It had evolved just enough to survive a casual glance, and not enough to fool anyone who had ever watched me build from a blank page. I called Kara immediately. How widely is this moving? I asked. Wide enough, she said. And Marina, there's more. Some of these ideas are being cited as part of why he's viewed as strategic enough for bigger rooms. After we hung up, I pulled up Nina's files again. The timestamps, the revisions, the legal pad sketch, the whiteboard photos. A trail not of inspiration but of inheritance claimed by the wrong heir. For the first time in 4 years, I understood that the truth was no longer only my private pain. It had become a risk inside the boardroom. Chapter 4. The room where he borrowed. My voice by the time Harlan Bennett walked me into the ballroom, the temperature of the evening had changed without anyone admitting it had. Not dramatically. That was never how these rooms worked. No one gasped. No violin screeched. People simply recalibrated in real time, which in executive circles is its own form of panic. Faces that had skimmed over me an hour earlier now paused a fraction too long. Hands appeared. Smiles sharpened. Memory improved. Harlan, as ever, did not perform. He just moved through the crowd as if my place beside him required no explanation. It was Michael Rhodes, who made the shift unmistakable. He crossed the room with a drink in one hand, and the brisk assurance of a man who had no interest in gossip because he preferred facts. Marina, he said, offering his hand, I've been wanting to meet you properly. I've read your integration notes. Strong work. There are sentences that sound ordinary until you measure where they are spoken. Thank you, I said. That's kind of you. It isn't kind, he said. It's accurate. Across the room, I saw 2 directors glance at one another. Social proof is vulgar as a concept and indispensable in practice. Daniel Porter, who had all the harmless energy of a man perpetually 2 beats behind the room, and somehow surviving on charm, drifted past Evan near the bar and said, a little too loudly, "Sorry, are you with the event team or Bennett operations?" It was a small thing. The kind of mistake that would have died instantly in any other setting. But I saw Evan's jaw tighten before he recovered into a laugh that came half a second late. "Neither," he said. "Ah," Daniel said. "My mistake." My eyes met Harlan's for one brief moment. He did not smile, but there was the faintest suggestion that he had noticed. Celeste, meanwhile, was learning in increments. She still wore the polished expression of a woman determined to remain above whatever was happening, but the confidence had gone brittle around the edges. She watched Michael speak to me. Watched Arthur nod when I passed. Watched Harlan keep me near him without explanation or apology. Her smile remained in place. Her eyes started doing math. I did not go near her. I did not need to. The next morning mattered more. I spent the evening in my hotel room overlooking the river, the city lit in fractured gold against black water. My coffee had gone cold twice. My laptop sat open on the desk, with files I no longer needed to review but could not quite stop touching, as if evidence became more real through repetition. Arthur called a little after 9. "You're still awake," he said. That sounds less like a question and more like a character assessment. It's both. I leaned back in the chair and looked out at the reflection of traffic moving along the river. "I'm not afraid of him," I said. "That's the strange part. What are you afraid of? That tomorrow turns something private into something official." Arthur was quiet for a moment. I could hear the soft ambient hum of a television, somewhere in the background, muted beyond recognition. "The truth is strongest when it doesn't need your volume," he said. "Let the documents do their work. You make that sound restful. I make it sound useful." That was as close to comfort as Arthur ever came, and oddly, it was enough. The conference room the next morning had too much glass, too much polished wood, too much air conditioning, and not enough room for dishonesty to breathe comfortably. Harlan sat at one end of the table, Arthur to his right. Victor Lang already had his reading glasses on, and a folder arranged with forensic neatness in front of him. Alyssa Romero stood near the screen, speaking quietly with Michael Rhodes. Naomi Pierce from Legal and Compliance was there, composed and grave in navy, with Tessa Nolan from HR beside her. Tessa had the calm face of someone accustomed to being in rooms where careers tilted. Evan entered with the old posture intact. Shoulders easy. Expression measured. The confidence of a man who had survived on timing for so long he mistook it for substance. He looked at me only once, and even then only briefly, with the faint, dismissive certainty of someone who still believed I belonged in support roles and side chairs. He assumed I was there because Harlan liked my work. He did not yet understand that my name was in the materials for a reason. The presentation began cleanly. Market positioning, post-merger opportunity mapping, integration sequencing. Then, slide by slide, he stepped into the architecture I knew in my bones. The three-part adoption sequence, the trust friction model, the progression from customer hesitation to internal capability thresholds. Even the transitions had that deliberate hinge I used when I wanted a room to follow complexity without feeling dragged through it. I sat very still. If he felt any danger, he hid it well. He spoke in that tempered executive cadence I had once helped refine. Back when I thought I was strengthening a partnership instead of furnishing a disguise. When he finished, there was the usual brief stillness that follows a deck people have been trained to call strategic. Naomi Pierce spoke first. "Before we move to implementation questions, I'd like clarification on authorship and development lineage for portions of this framework." The room changed at once, not violently. Precisely, Evan folded his hands. "Of course." Naomi glanced down at her notes. "Specifically, we'd like to understand the origin of the adoption and sequencing model, represented on slides 3 through 8, how it evolved across prior strategy materials, and how it has been attributed internally in the years leading up to this transaction." Evan gave a small professional smile. "Strategy work is collaborative by nature. These ideas develop over time across teams." "That wasn't my question," Naomi said. No sharpness. No heat. Somehow worse, he adjusted in his chair. The materials reflect work developed across multiple roles and discussions over several years. Victor spoke without looking up from the packet in front of him. The metadata does not suggest multiple origins. Evan's eyes shifted. Alyssa slid a binder across the table to Naomi, who opened it with the serene efficiency of a woman who had prepared for resistance. We have archived email chains from 2016 through 2018, she said. Tracked changes on draft decks. Calendar invites for prep sessions. Off-site materials. Whiteboard images. PowerPoint version history. We also have corroborating witness accounts from multiple professionals familiar with the development of these frameworks. Evan laughed once, lightly, aiming for incredulity and landing somewhere closer to strain. With respect, this feels like an overreading of common strategic language. It would, said Arthur, if it were common. He said it mildly. The sentence landed like stone. Naomi turned to me. Marina, for the record, can you identify the origin of the sequencing model shown on slide 4? Yes, I said. I built the first version in 2016 for a leadership offsite at Midwest Process Solutions. It was refined over multiple planning cycles after that. And the language pattern on slides 6 and 7. Mine originally, I said. Not every phrase. The underlying structure, yes. Evan looked at me then, fully. For the first time that morning he seemed to understand the room he was in. That's a subjective claim, he said. It was. Victor replied, finally looking up, until the timestamps arrived. Alyssa reached into the binder and placed a scanned page on the table. Yellow legal pad. Slanted handwriting, 3 columns. 2 loops. Arrows connecting readiness to capability. Even from where I sat, I recognized the page as if it had been pulled from my own bloodstream. Naomi continued. Kara Wexler has independently confirmed deck circulation patterns and language continuity across later industry materials. Nina Carver has confirmed document lineage and revision history. Jocelyn Reed has provided a separate account suggesting this may not be an isolated instance of misattribution. Tessa Nolan spoke for the first time. To be clear, we are not discussing stylistic overlap. We are discussing whether a senior executive represented materially significant strategic work as primarily his own in settings where credibility, advancement, and transaction trust were affected. Evan's voice flattened a degree. I never claimed sole authorship. Michael Rhodes, who had stayed silent until then, leaned back and said, in fairness, you didn't do much to correct the assumption either. No one rushed to save him. Harlan folded his hands on the table. Marina's role was visible to us during due diligence because the work itself was visible, he said. This is not a matter of social discomfort. It is a matter of executive trust. Evan turned toward him, trying for steadiness. So what exactly is being alleged here? Naomi answered before anyone else could. At minimum, a failure of attribution and disclosure significant enough to impair confidence. Potentially more pending review. The color had changed in his face. Not dramatically, but enough. The smoothness was gone. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. This is being personalized because of history. I felt every eye in the room flick once toward me and then away again. Not because they doubted me. Because everyone understood the temptation to reduce a woman's evidence to her biography. Arthur spared him from the illusion. No, he said. It's being documented because of your history. That was the sentence that ended him in the room. If not yet on paper, no one declared a verdict. No one pounded a table. Tessa stated, in a tone almost gentle, that Evan would be removed from the integration steering group, pending internal review, by legal, compliance, and HR. Naomi confirmed document preservation steps and follow-up interviews. Victor added that any materials tied to strategic authorship representations would be re-examined in the transaction file. Orderly. Professional. Fatal, Celeste was not in the room, but I thought of her anyway. Of what she must have seen beginning to crack the night before. How quickly admiration curdles when competence turns out to have been borrowed. When the meeting adjourned, chairs moved softly. Papers gathered. No one made a scene. Harlan touched my elbow as he passed. You handled that exactly right, he said. Alyssa gave me a look that carried more feeling than words would have improved. Victor stopped in front of me, awkward in the way precise men often are when approaching anything like emotion. For the record, he said, the data was conclusive. From Victor, that was nearly an embrace. I stepped out into the corridor and felt the strange quiet that follows impact. Not triumph. Not vindication in any cinematic sense. Just a loosening, deep and interior, as if some locked mechanism inside me had finally accepted that it could stand down. No one was giving me back the years, the engagement, the stolen labor, the small erosions of confidence that come from watching someone else wear your work like a tailored coat. But there is a kind of justice in hearing the most important room say the right name out loud. The first voice I heard belonged to my stepmother, looking through the glass toward the river beyond the building, and understood something I had missed for years. The most surprising part was not that Evan had been exposed. It was that once he lost his audience, he finally had to remember I had been the one who gave him a voice in the first place. Chapter 5. Forgiveness without access. What followed was less dramatic than people imagine and more permanent than they expect. By the end of 2024, Evan was off the integration steering group. There were reviews, follow-up interviews, document holds, careful language from legal and HR, and the kind of internal silence that tells you everyone understands exactly what happened, even when no one intends to make a spectacle of it. Early in 2025, he resigned to pursue other opportunities. It was the sort of phrase corporate America uses when it wants order more than theater. Naomi and Tessa never pretended governance was emotional. They did not need to. Executive trust, once cracked, rarely repairs in the shape it had before. Credibility is strange that way. It takes years to build, one meeting at a time, and one well-documented pattern to hollow out. People in the industry understood. That was enough. The apology came in February. Not a grand one. No bouquet, no handwritten letter left where I could discover it like a movie heroine. He called first. I did not answer. Then he emailed, asking if we could meet somewhere private, somewhere neutral, as if neutrality had not always worked better for him than for me. I agreed to 20 minutes in a hotel lobby in Oak Brook at 11 in the morning, which felt like exactly the kind of place where difficult truths should have to sit under bright lighting. He looked older. Not ruined, just reduced. Some men are handsome in power and merely ordinary without it. Evan had built so much of himself around reception that once the room stopped leaning in, there was less there than he had counted on. He said my name carefully, like he was approaching unstable ground. I sat across from him with coffee I did not intend to finish. I owe you an apology, he said. Yes, I said. You do, he swallowed. For a moment I almost felt sorry for him, which is one of the least useful emotions in the world when dealing with men who have confused your generosity for renewable fuel. I should have acknowledged your work years ago, he said. I told myself it was collaborative, that the lines were blurred, that we were building things together. But I can see now that I benefited from not being precise when precision would have cost me. That, at least, was honest. I'm sorry for the professional harm, he said. And for the personal harm, I know I hurt you. I watched him for a moment. There was regret there, yes, but it was the regret of a man who had finally met consequence. Not the deeper and rarer kind that comes from fully inhabiting another person's pain. He understood loss now because some of it was his. I believe you're sorry, I said. His face shifted, hopeful too quickly. But your apology doesn't restore anything, I said. It doesn't need to, either. I'm not asking it to. He looked down at his hands. I never meant for it to go this far. No, I said. You meant for it to go your way. That landed cleanly. No anger in it, which made it harder to argue with. He exhaled and nodded once. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. I may forgive you, I said. In truth, I probably already have in the only way that matters for me. But forgiveness is not access. It is not reunion. It is not permission to return. He looked at me then with the first expression I had seen on his face in years that did not seem arranged for effect. I understand, and I thought, maybe he did. Or maybe he only understood that the old doors were closed, and that no amount of softened tone could turn the handle. Either way, the outcome was the same. When I stood to leave, he said, "For what it's worth, you were always the better strategist." I almost laughed. "It would have been worth more in 2018, I said, and walked out before he could ask for anything else. Celeste tried a different route. By spring, whatever public shine had remained around them had started to dim. I heard things, not because I went looking, but because suburbs are ecosystems, and information travels through them like weather. A few months was apparently enough time for her to discover what I had once taken years to admit, that Evan valued admiration the way some people value oxygen. He could not love anyone he was not also using as a mirror. She sent me a message asking if we could talk woman to woman, which in my experience is usually how women announce they would like absolution at a discount. I did not reply. A week later she approached me after a charity luncheon in Hinsdale, all polished caution and expensive regret. "Marina, I was hoping for just 5 minutes," she said. "No," I said, not unkindly. Her face tightened. "I think there are things you may not understand about what happened." That nearly made me smile. "I understand enough," I said. "And whatever else helps you sleep is yours to work out without me." The hardest consequence for Celeste was not public humiliation. Women like her are often too practiced at social recovery for that alone to do much damage. It was that she no longer controlled the narrative. Worse, she did not get to use me to cleanse it. I would not offer her the intimacy of a private reckoning she could later remember as mutual. Pamela Sutton called in June. Pamela had once perfected the art of sounding sympathetic while minimizing the wound in the same breath. She had told me, back when everything first collapsed, that people were complicated and marriages ended, and perhaps it would be healthier not to dwell on professional credit when emotions were already running high. There is no minimizing like suburban female minimizing. It arrives dressed as balance. Now her voice carried the slight stiffness of someone rearranging old opinions under new facts. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I didn't grasp the extent of what was done to you." "No," I said. "You didn't. I should have been more thoughtful. That would have helped." She let out a small breath. "I'd like to make that right if I can." I looked out the window of the ranch house in Love's Park, at the yard still too bare from winter, and felt no urge at all to step back into rooms that had found my dignity inconvenient until powerful men endorsed it. "That's kind of you," I said, "but I'm not looking to return to anything." And I wasn't. That was one of the quieter surprises of the year. Once certain doors reopened, I realized I had stopped wanting them. Vindication does not obligate you to move back into the house where you were once made unwelcome. Rachel came up one Saturday in late summer with Owen. And a box of pastries too large for 3 people. June drove over later with tomatoes from her garden, and the expression she wore when, trying not to look proud in case pride might jinx things. The kitchen in Love's Park was small enough to force honesty. Owen made coffee. Rachel leaned against the counter and watched me move around the room, as if she were trying to reconcile me with the mother she had worried over in Wheaton, then in Geneva, then in the first unsettled months after everything broke apart. "You seem lighter," she said. I set plates on the table. "That's because I am." She smiled, but there was moisture gathering in her eyes. "I used to think justice had to be loud," she said, "or public in some ugly way. I thought if you didn't burn everything down, it meant they got away with it." Owen glanced at her, then at me, and said nothing, which was one of the many reasons I trusted him. He never rushed in to occupy emotional space that did not belong to him. "Sometimes quiet is the burn," I said. "Sometimes being believed in the right room is enough." June, slicing tomatoes with the severe competence she brought to all domestic acts, said, "Enough is a very grown woman's word." We laughed at that, and something in Rachel softened. I think it mattered to her that I had not become bitter, only clearer. It mattered to me too. Work found a new shape after that. I kept some advisory projects. Bennett and Gaines sent the occasional strategy issue my way when they wanted someone who could actually see around corners instead of just naming them elegantly. I said yes when it interested me and no when it didn't. There is an entire category of freedom that arrives late and is therefore better used. I also started mentoring through a women in business program that rotated between Rockford and the western Chicago suburbs. Not as a crusader, not as a cautionary tale in heels, just as a woman old enough to tell younger women the things I wish someone had told me plainly. Keep your drafts, keep the emails, put your name on the work. Do not confuse being indispensable with being protected. And if someone keeps asking you to trust the future while taking credit in the present, believe the pattern before you believe the promise. One morning that fall, I was by the window with coffee, the house quiet around me, when I opened the folder where I had kept the scanned page from 2016. The yellow legal pad, slanted handwriting, 3 columns, arrows in the margins. The first shape of an idea that had gone out into the world wearing someone else's suit for far too long. I held it for a minute and realized I no longer felt the old spike in my chest. It was not evidence now. It was a fingerprint. The work had always been mine. The voice had always been mine. People had delayed the recognition, borrowed the shine, tried to edge me off the guest list of my own life, but none of that had changed the truth. They could misname it. They could not erase it. That was the part I had needed to learn in my 50s, not just that betrayal can cut through love, friendship, status, and livelihood all at once, but that a second act can still be built from what survives. Not prettier because the pain was worth it. I don't believe that. Better because at some point you stop asking the people who diminished you to confirm your size. I did not win because Evan suffered. I won because eventually I no longer needed him, or Celeste, or any room arranged around their version of me. To tell me what my work was worth, if you've ever been written out of your own effort, then you know some victories don't need noise to be complete. And if this story stayed with you, stay with me for the next one.